All right, welcome back. It's time to talk about some strategies of World War II. Last time we got through the appeasement part, the build up to it, the invasion of Poland, the start of the war. So now we're going to start talking about the war itself. World War II is generally split into two theaters. You have the European theater and then the Pacific theater. So we're going to roughly kind of break it up into chunks talking about that, right? So we talked about the start. Now we're going to talk about the war in Europe. Towards the end of the week, we'll start talking about the start of the war in the Pacific. So for now, we want to see, now that the war is going to be fought, how it's going to be fought in Europe. And really, the most important name of the game here, the by far catalyzing strategy in this, is the German strategy of Blitzkrieg. Blitzkrieg is a term that means lightning war, and obviously you need Pikachu for that. It basically relies on all of the new stuff that was made during World War I. And by all the new stuff, I mean tanks, planes, and then kind of an in-between new thing, radio. So the way Blitzkrieg functions is you're going to do a rapid, concentrated attack against the enemy. You want to catch them off guard. So it's really important that you have intel on where they are, where their weak points are, and what you do is you send in your mechanized infantry first. Your tanks, your vehicles, anything. Mechanized infantry is basically anything that has an engine in it that goes on the ground. So you send in your mechanized infantry first, and you're not actually trying to take out all their forces with that. What you want to do with your mechanized infantry is you punch through enemy lines. And then you just keep on going. You keep on pushing as hard as you possibly can. You got air support in terms of planes that are backing you up so that you're taking out, some more of the defensive structures. You could bomb them. You could take out other enemy planes to protect your mechanized infantry. But you could also do scouting. And remember that scouting is super important because you want to know where all their forces are. And now what you do is you keep your mechanized infantry going. You start attacking their cities. You start attacking their supply lines. And now the enemy is stuck with a choice. Do you maintain the defensive line you currently have to defend yourself against the follow-up troops that are coming? Because Germany has only sent their mechanized infantry at you. They still have their actual infantry coming, their soldiers, the things that you use to actually take and hold positions. Those people are still coming. But now you've got those people coming at you from the front, and behind you have the mechanized infantry. If you don't go deal with that mechanized infantry, they're going to take out your supply lines, they're going to destroy your towns, your cities, all your population, and worst case scenario, they could also then circle back around, and once you start fighting the normal infantry, the mechanized infantry could attack you from behind. So you're pretty much forced to fall back and deal with that mechanized infantry and maybe leave like a token force defending your main area, which means that the normal infantry can then roll in and just super easily take out your defensive positions and keep on moving forward. And you're basically then caught off guard. You're constantly falling back trying to deal with the mechanized infantry that just came through, and you can't hold up to anything else. Now, I mentioned radio, and that one is super important, just not in a flashy way. How are your tanks, your mechanized infantry, going to communicate with everybody else behind enemy lines without the radio? Are they going to send smoke signals? No, so radio is super important. Now, this is an incredibly effective tactic for multiple reasons. Reason number one, it's going to unbalance the enemy. The enemy cannot really mount an effective defense against this because they are constantly caught off guard and trying to deal with it, and you just keep on hitting them, right? It's like you're getting in a fight with somebody and you walk up and you sucker punch them, and then they fall down and you just don't let them get up, right? You just keep on hitting them because if they get up, they're going to be able to mount some kind of defense. But if they're stuck there, you have a huge advantage. So unbalancing the enemy. Getting those surprise attacks going. People aren't able to react quickly enough. The other big reason why this is effective is nobody really has experience fighting this. Again, think of the stuff that it relies on. Tanks, aircraft, radios. Those are all new technology. And yeah, they've been around since World War I for the most part, but who has been fighting since World War I? Britain and France haven't. They've been focusing on rebuilding. In fact, they've been specifically trying not to fight. Germany's been fighting. So they've been practicing using Blitzkrieg, and in fact being able to invade Poland in that phony war that we talked about last time, giving them time to invade other places like Denmark, that gave them a lot of time to fine-tune Blitzkrieg. But the people defending against it, they've got no experience dealing with this, and there's nothing they can look at to be like, oh, this is how you deal with Blitzkrieg, because it's never happened before. It's a brand new form of warfare, so it's going to be really, really effective. The super effective meme we got going on here. So the effect of this strategy is going to be significant. And basically, it's Germany kills everybody. They take over Poland immediately. I mentioned Denmark earlier. Germany takes over Denmark in 24 hours. From the start of the invasion to the time that Denmark surrendered, less than 24 hours passed. France gets completely caught off guard by this. Remember in World War I, the Schlieffen Plan, where did Germany attack France through? They went through Belgium, right? So France is like, all right, there's no way that Germany would attack through Belgium again. So they make this area called the Maginot Line, which is between the French and German border. And they super fortify that thing. There's no way anybody's going to get through it. And then Germany attacked France through Belgium again. Oops. So Germany attacks on May 10th of 1940, and by June of 1925, France has signed an armistice. France had way inferior equipment because they hadn't really been focusing on rearming themselves. They did not have any experience with mobile warfare. They were not ready for this in any way. And we, as a society and a historical community, give France a lot of a hard time about how quickly they surrendered here. But realistically, nobody did any better than them. Every other country that Germany blitzkrieged up until Russia, which is there's other things going on there, got destroyed. So, France actually held out longer than most of the other countries did. And you might be like, well, wait a minute, what about Britain? We'll talk about that in a second. Britain, you can't blitzkrieg. Think about it. How is Britain different than France? It's an island. So how are you going to get your tanks into Britain to blitzkrieg them? You got to cross the English Channel. That's the smallest area, but that's been covered in mines. It's got the British Navy protecting it. You're not going to be able to get in there. So what's going to happen instead is Germany's going to be stuck in the situation where their main tactic, blitzkrieg, cannot be used. So they're going to use the Luftwaffe instead. They're going to start bombing the heck out of Britain. It's going to be this thing called the Blitz. Is this where I talk about... I think this is where I talk about the Blitz. So Germany then is going to start basically just non-stop bombing Britain. The hope being that if they could decrease the morale of the British people enough, that it'll force Britain to surrender. And then Germany can turn around and deal with the next big enemy on their list, which would be Russia. You might be like, wait a minute, they have a non-aggression pact. Yes, they do. Both Russia and Germany were planning to break it as soon as it was convenient for them. So the hope here is they would bomb Britain to the point that Britain would have to give up. But they underestimated two things. Number one, the British Spitfires, which is a kind of plane they had, which did a really good job defending Britain. And number two, how stubborn Britain was going to be. Britain refused to surrender. This one, by the way, is another time where I get to maybe ruin some childhood memories for you. If you've ever read the Chronicles of Narnia, you might recall that the kids in the first book, they have to leave the city to go live with their family in the countryside. And that's, where they find the wardrobe when they go to Narnia. They had to leave the city because the Blitz was going on. The Chronicles of Narnia takes place in the real world during World War II, and they were escaping the Blitz. Now, here's where I maybe ruin some childhood memories. If you've never read the full book series, which surprisingly a lot of people haven't, when I was a kid I did, and I didn't remember this either until I kind of reread it as an adult. In the last book, it makes it very clear that Narnia never existed. The kids actually died on the train going to the countryside. They hopped on the train to go move to the countryside with their family, and the Nazis bombed the train, and the train derailed and blew up, and they all died, and the entire Chronicles of Narnia series is an allegory for them going to heaven, Aslan the lion is God, and Narnia is heaven, and those kids are dead. So the Nazis killed the Chronicles of Narnia kids. Just letting you know. All right, moving on. How are the Allies going to react? Well, they're going to turtle up, because that's the only option they have. The Allied strategy was not organized at all. They were completely caught off guard. They were not ready for the strength of Germany. So they're pretty much just reacting to what Germany is doing for almost the entire war. Even up until like the last several years of the war, they're still just kind of trying to react to Germany. That's how effective Germany's strategy and military is here. Germany was scary strong during World War II. So Dunkirk, which I mentioned earlier, and which a movie was somewhat recently made with one of the One Direction dudes in it. At Dunkirk, the British forces were barely able to escape with about 300,000 troops. If the German forces would have just kept pushing with their tanks, which is what they were advised to do, but Hitler decided no, he didn't want to do that. If they would have kept on pushing, those 300 troops would have been destroyed, and Britain probably would have been forced to give up. But they didn't keep on pushing. Those 300,000 troops got away, and that kind of gave Britain a little bit more of a fighting chance here. Britain is alone after France fell, but you might see, like in our battles activity later, for example, that the French are still listed in battles. At this point, there is occupied France, also known as Vichy France, and then there's Free France. Charles de Gaulle, who was a French military leader, actually escaped from the takeover of France, and he led a resistance force where, basically there was a French resistance going on throughout the whole war. So officially, Britain was alone fighting Germany, but unofficially, there was still a French resistance force going on. So that's where the whole Blitz thing is going to go down. Eventually, America is going to join the war. And we'll talk about that more when we get to, the Pacific side of things, because that's how we joined the war with Pearl Harbor. But basically, we joined the war at the end of 1941. So we decide we're going to do a Europe first policy. Yeah, we're going to deal with Japan and the Pacific, but we're going to put most of our focus on taking out Europe. I get so distracted every time I do this slide by the handful of bees. It just terrifies me. I don't know why I keep this picture in here. Anyway, Europe first. So we decide going from Britain to France would be rough. In the same way that Germany can't go from France to Britain because it's too fortified, Germany has fortified the heck out of northern France. And us crossing the English Channel would be the same as Germany trying to do it. It would be a bloodbath. It would be really bad. So what we go for is a kind of a two possibility approach. America's like, nah, screw it. Let's cross the channel. We could do it. We could go, but in 1943, we could be ready. We'll have forces good to go, and we're just going to push in there. If Hitler or Stalin show signs of collapse, we can maybe even go in there earlier. We'll get things going. Britain is the one that's like, no, that's a bad plan. It's way too dangerous. How about this? Germany and Italy, especially Italy, have forces in North Africa. Let's go take North Africa, get a foothold there. We could attack Italy, which is way easier to attack than northern France. Once we take out Italy, we can go from Italy into Germany, and then, Germany's big ally of Italy will be taken out. Everything will be great. And basically, America and Britain argue back and forth on exactly how this is going to go down. And it's decided eventually that we will, for the time being, otherwise known as in principle, we will go with the American plan, right? So America starts pouring resources into Britain, but then Hitler makes a big mistake. Hitler attacks Russia. And now at this point, Russia is our ally by virtue of being the enemy of our enemy. So now America is supplying Britain, they're supplying Russia, they're fighting the war in the Pacific, and we decide, actually, we don't really have enough ships to get this thing going and crossing the channel, so let's do that whole North Africa thing. So we switch plans again, and then we go into North Africa. But we don't just forget about Europe. What we decide to do is we pull a Germany on them. In the same way that Germany decided to do a bombing campaign against Britain, now we start doing a bombing campaign against Germany. I mention this because we'll talk about it again later, because we give people or countries like Germany and Japan a really hard time for their attacks on civilian targets, like bombing Britain or Pearl Harbor. We then do the same thing. We just don't talk about it as much. That bombing campaign we enact against Germany, we bomb a lot of civilian targets. And we also are going to do a bombing campaign against Japan where we bomb a lot of civilian targets. So that's not so great. We're not going to do this activity, because that's a different one. So that means that we're actually done with this one. Our next PowerPoint will be talking about the actual course of the war right up until the end. We'll save the end until after we talk about the Pacific, and that'll be good to go. So thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you next time.